Comics have been around since the early 1800s, and like most art forms, they are constantly evolving. For a long time, comics were little one-page stories, and then before you know it, they were about detective cases, monsters, aliens, and of course, superheroes. And that changed everything for the medium, because not only do most people associate comics with the superhero genre, but the majority of comics published are indeed a part of the superhero classification. The comic book industry has been one of constant ups and downs, more so than what I've seen with other means of entertainment. And in the 90s, the trade hit an all-time low with sales. Marvel and DC relaunched titles, kept greenlighting standalone miniseries, and of course, the creation of variant covers, which a lot of people say was the big reason for the economic crash of comics going into the early 2000s. Don't even get me started on the swimsuit specials. And while the two big publishers were going downhill, there was a group of artists that came together to escape the cycle of corporate tragedy and heavy commercialism. They wanted to forge their own path and create creator-owned original properties with brand new ideas not seen in the medium before. That publisher was Image Comics, and their experiment was a success, with sales of their series like Spawn outselling Marvel and DC. And what stung more for Marvel especially was the fact that most of the founders of Image were some of their biggest artists at the time. But due to the unfair pay, they left, and well, that bit Marvel in the ass hard. And what made the Image victory even more sweet is just that 4 years after their creation, Marvel went bankrupt. So now Marvel lost the majority portion of their star talent, created a new competition, got outranked by that competition, and then went bankrupt and are on the verge of having to possibly come to terms with shutting down Marvel for good. So they knew they had to make a big change. In 2000, the then Marvel editor-in-chief Bob Harras stepped down, and the then comic book artist known for his work on Daredevil and Punisher, Joe Quesada, became the new editor-in-chief. And almost immediately, he brought one of Marvel's biggest changes, and arguably, at least at the very beginning, one of their biggest successes. That would be Marvel's Ultimate Universe, a whole new continuity separate from the main timeline that allowed new readers to join in on Marvel Comics, while being able to tell more modern versions of the characters and explore the company's most famous characters from a whole different perspective. And to make this initiative work, Quesada hired two up-and-coming writers that found some success as indie creators to run the whole operation. The biggest title in the Ultimate Universe was Ultimate Spider-Man, written by Brian Michael Bendis, but the other big titles included Ultimate Fantastic Four, Ultimate X-Men, and their universe's Avengers called The Ultimates. And for all those series, one man was behind them all. A man who had a conversation with Stan Lee about his own future and the future of comics. And during that conversation, Stan convinced this man to leave Marvel and create his own creator-owned series. This would launch his career even higher and keep him successful for another 21 years, where he created his very own intertwined comic book universe, leading to multiple film and TV deals before he sold his brand to Netflix for a whopping $20 million. Making him one of the richest comic book writers to date. A universe that could genuinely rival Marvel and DC. And that man is Mark Millar. Now, there's probably a 50% chance that you saw the thumbnail or just heard his name and rolled your eyes, because he is a bit of a divisive figure in the comic book community. You either love him or you hate him. And I'm sure with the title of this video, you can assume where I lie. And in case you haven't figured it out, I love his work. And he currently is my favorite comic book writer of all time. Yeah, I said it. Do I think he's the greatest comic book writer of all time? No, but he sure as hell is my favorite. And for those who don't know much about him, or why he's, at times not so beloved, well, in the early 2000s, he had a bit of a reputation for being an edgelord. And it just so happened to be the best time for that kind of artistic voice. Because the Comic Book Code of Authority, which was basically a set of rules that make a comic book acceptable for kids, began to be quietly ignored. And Marvel, well, they completely gave up on it in 2001, allowing them more creative freedom to tell more mature stories, which led to their Max label that created runs like Garth Ennis's extremely grounded Punisher series and Michael Brian Bendis' Jessica Jones. And as much as this newfound freedom was a breath of fresh air, it was also the goddamn Wild West. The overcompensation for years of constantly having to tone down parts of their stories was just unleashed, and a whole lot of it was not for the better. And a good amount of Millar's early work contributed to the early 2000s edgelord writing. There's no doubt about that. And now people who haven't read his work since probably 2005 think he's only capable of telling edgy stories with tons of violence, cursing, and sex, and that's just not the case. So I'm here to take a stand for Mark Millar, and hopefully I can convince people that have dismissed his work or never have had the opportunity to read his projects to give it a chance. Specifically his original comic book universe of characters titled Millar World. This universe was such a palate cleanser to all the Marvel and DC comics I've read throughout my lifetime, and tells a variety of different stories from high school vigilantes, secret government organizations, councils of wizards, time travelers, criminal assassins, vampires, and so much more. All concepts we've seen before, but within Millar's hands, he constantly finds a different angle to breathe new life into the kind of tales we've gotten countless times before. And yes, he does throw a bit of edge into it, and that element of his writing style makes him so much fun to read. But that's not what has kept me loving his work. It's the amount of genuine humanity he portrays in his narratives that always has me running back to him. The way he can balance juvenile humor with absurd gore and bona fide heartfelt human characters is a wonder to see. So what I'll be doing from here on out is pitch you some of my favorite Millar World titles and give you some suggestions on what you could read, without spoilers of course. Maybe you love comics and superheroes but want something different. Shit, maybe you hate comics and superheroes but want to give them a chance. Maybe you've read Millar's work in the past and aren't a fan of his early stuff. And maybe you want me to hurry the hell up and give you some recommendations. Either way, I'm sure there's something here for you to enjoy. So I'll be breaking up my recommendations by 5 separate categories. Wholesome Stories, just a good old time, larger series, Edgelord Shit, and lastly, my overall recommendation. Wholesome Stories. The first 3 series on this list are for those that think Mark Millar can't write wholesome stories, and proves how much character depth Millar can add to his stories and make them more emotionally powerful than you'd expect. Superior. An incredible place to start reading some wholesome Millar is with Superior. This is essentially Millar's take on Shazam. It's about a middle schooler named Simon who has multiple sclerosis, and due to that, he is wheelchair bound. He doesn't feel like he fits in anywhere and gets bullied for his condition. Every aspect of his life is made difficult because of his disability. He feels like it's ruined his life. But there's 2 things in his life that make it easier to get through. That's his best friend Chris and his favorite superhero, Superior. So get this, a magical alien monkey comes down to Earth saying he can grant Simon a wish that could last a week. And he decides he wants to live the fantasy we all wanted as kids. He wants to be a superhero. The magic monkey grants his wish and he spends a week trying to do as much good for the world as possible before his powers go away. It's such a heartwarming story with incredible artwork from Francis Lionel Yu, and some incredible ideas that Millar throws in, like what happens when a superhero comes out of nowhere looking exactly like the actor that plays him in the movies. On top of that, there's some awesome twists and turns throughout the narrative that will keep you hooked all the way till the very end. And don't be surprised that throughout the run, you might get a little bit emotional. Huck. Do you love Forrest Gump? I hope so, it's a great movie. Do you love Superman? You fucking better or we're gonna have a problem. But I digress. Huck is the tale of a little baby that got abandoned in a small town in Maine, which, let's be honest, every town in Maine is small, even their big cities. Well, it turns out Huck has superpowers akin to Superman, except more like early Superman, who can't fly but can jump really high, doesn't have heat vision or freeze breath, but he does have his super strength. And one extra power. He has the uncanny ability to track anything or anyone down. I guess super intuition. Chuck spends his days working at a gas station, usually after he does his daily good deed, which he jots down in a little journal. The whole town knows about his superpowers and love him for all the help he provides, so they keep his existence a secret from the world to protect Huck from those that would want to take advantage of him. Now remember how I mentioned Forrest Gump earlier? Well, Huck is on the spectrum, which is a beautiful perspective to look at from a superhero. But the intrigue of the story lies with the possibility of Huck's secret becoming exposed to the world, and how the town has to come together to protect him. Huck is arguably Millar's most wholesome comic that brings back old-fashioned superhero values that makes for a brilliant, soul-stirring adventure that reminds the world why we need characters like Superman to keep us looking forward to a better future, to keep us hoping for the betterment of mankind. And the cherry on top for this series is that it's drawn by one of my favorite artists ever, Raphael Albuquerque, who has recently done some exceptional work on the last run of Detective Comics by Ram V. So please, do yourself a favor and read this, because it's like reading a big warm hug. Starlight. To move away from superheroes a bit, we come to Starlight, a sci-fi escapade about an aging man named Duke, who feels like he has nothing. He's retired from the Air Force, his kids don't speak to him, his whole town thinks he's a nutcase, and his wife passed a year prior. and he's still undergoing his grieving process. He's in a lonely and vulnerable place in his life where he has to come to terms with his aging body. But I did promise a sci-fi story. Well, let me tell you, there's a reason everyone in his town thinks he's got a few screws loose. That's because during one of his Air Force missions, he got taken to another planet where he helped the whole population take down a tyrannical dictator and free the people and brought an era of peace. And when he came back to Earth and explained why he disappeared, no one believed him, which of course led to him becoming an outcast in his community. Well, on one rainy night, while Duke is reminiscing on his past life, a spaceship from Tantalus, the planet he previously saved in his younger years, lands on his front yard, and inside the spacecraft, a 12-year-old boy named Krish steps out and explains to Duke that their planet is facing a new dictatorship. Tantalus once more needs his help to defeat tyranny. Duke thinks about how little he has left, barely any kids, no real friends, no more career, and no more love of his life. He stands there, gazing among the stars with a lit cigarette in his mouth, wondering what it would be like to go on one last adventure. And from there, it is a true swashbuckling adventure, heavily inspired by Flash Gordon. From start to finish, this is a poignant chronicle of a man who, in the face of a life that has backstabbed him, chooses empathy and optimism to conquer his feeling of loneliness and heartbreak. This is 100% one of Miller's finest works. Just a good old time. Sometimes all you're looking for is some good old fun, something a bit breezy with a whole lot of action and humor. But it also doesn't mean you don't want some interesting characters and plot lines. Well, these next series have both. Chrononauts. To stick to the sci-fi genre, we have Chrononauts. Now, all the other series I've mentioned so far have been one and dones at the moment. But Chrononauts has 2 volumes, and it seems like Miller is going to make a 3rd entry for the series at some point. This series follows Corbin and Danny, best friends who are scientific masterminds that end up cracking time travel. And in all honesty, there isn't much really to say with this one. It's pure fun with a nice bromance, having a very heavy Top Gun tone. This series has a battle with people from the 1500s going against motherfuckers with machine guns and cars. Do I even need to say anything else to get you interested in this? MPH. MPH is one of Miller's most overlooked stories, and it breaks my heart because it's damn near perfect. Only running 5 issues, but compacting as much narrative and character growth as possible without it feeling rushed and coming to an insanely satisfying ending that puts a ginormous grin on your face. It's about a group of 4 friends, Roscoe, Duncan, Rosa, and her little brother Baseball, who all live in Detroit and have had to live off of small petty crimes just to get by. And while Roscoe ends up in prison for one of his said crimes, he is given a mysterious experimental drug called MPH. No one knows where the drug came from or who manufactured it, but when it's taken, the user gains super speed. Roscoe uses the MPH drug to break out of jail and meet up with his girlfriend Rosa and the rest of the group to spread the love of MPH. But they don't decide to only have fun with it. They find an even better use. They come up with the idea of stealing money so they can give it to impoverished communities that need it more than them. But problems arise when a certain member of the group begins to act selfishly, putting the others in harm's way, while every US agency is hunting them down and slowly narrowing in on them issue by issue. MPH is a perfectly tight, man on the run, pun intended, narrative that doesn't compromise rich character building while also being able to deliver on a large, entertaining, action-packed premise. If you read this one, I guarantee you'll have an excellent time and will want to finish it in one sitting. Larger series. So everything we've covered so far, except for Chrononauts, are one and dones. There's no real continuation. They're all one self-contained story. But I hear you. Maybe you want something longer, to be able to spend more time with characters and watch them grow. Well then, these next few are definitely for you. American Jesus. This is such a fun concept, the idea of a child being the second coming of Christ and all the shenanigans that ensue. The American Jesus trilogy is 2 separate stories about 2 separate people and how they converge with each other. The first book, we meet Jody, an all-around great kid who lives in a lower-income town in Illinois, who finds out that he has superpowers akin to Jesus. I know it sounds absolutely crazy, but it works on so many levels. From the artwork and warm color inking from Peter Gross, to the characterization of Jody, to the hilarious humor that comes from a 12-year-old boy believing they are Jesus Christ. And the gut-wrenching plot twist that will have your mouth drop to the floor and wanting to know where the series goes next. The second book consists of a teenage girl named Catalina who lives in a compound and is hidden from the world due to her living in what she believes is a cult. And I can't say much about this one without spoiling book 1, so we will simply move on. But by the end of the second book, both Catalina and Jodie's lives converge for one cosmically epic story. This is another short, breezy read that doesn't feel like it's missing anything. You have all the information you need and uses its limited amount of issues, which are 3 per volume, to tell a mighty tale about finding, or at times fighting, faith and how people can easily turn against it when they need it the most, or turn it into something it never was supposed to be. And by the time you get to the conclusion, you'll be asking yourself, whose side are you on? Jupiter's Legacy. This is Miller's magnum opus. This series chronicles the Samson family from 3 different generations. But of course, they aren't a normal family, they are the world's greatest superheroes. In the 1930s, after the stock market crash, the Great Depression has begun. And in the midst of chaos, the Samson family is trying to find a way to find meaning to their life and help themselves get out of their economic situation, when they get a weird calling to a mystifying island that came to one of them in a dream. When they get there, they are given superpowers from an unknown alien race, and when they come back to America, they use their powers to better the country and further the world, during the time they needed most. Borrowing from the ideas of what created Superman in the 30s and creating an actual narrative from that makes the series such a thrill to read. And the subject matter the series commits to is a wide variety, but some that I found interesting were the ideas of how the modern age only cares about financial gain, the ideas of old-fashioned values dying, how it doesn't only try to vilify capitalism, but does show how in the right hands it could be a humanitarian tool. And the most interesting to me, how far you will allow your blood relations to push you before you finally give up on them. Jupiter's Legacy is a true saga of epic proportions with a wide, diverse, and distinct cast of characters and rich lore that I cannot do justice in explaining. It's a series that has now turned 11 years old and is currently in the middle of coming to a grand conclusion, and trust me, you won't want to miss out any longer if you go ahead and give the first volume a try. Also, if you're trying to get the first volume, make sure you're getting this one right here. It'll only say Jupiter's Legacy on the back. After Netflix bought Millarworld, they messed up the numbers on the volumes, so if you buy a volume 1 that says Netflix anywhere and has this cover, you're actually starting with the prequel series, not the original. So start here, not there, even if it says volume 3. The Magic Order. This one is a pretty special one to me. The best way I can describe it is it's Harry Potter meets Watchmen, and that's all I should have to say to get you to pull out your wallet. The first thing this series gets right is the tone. This has some dark ass shit, but there's always a level of humor and warmth thrown in there to balance everything out. And the lore and magical rules are so well explained and thought out that the concepts Miller goes for had me jumping around in excitement because they really are that awesome. And this comic has had some of the greatest consistently breathtaking artists I've seen on a whole ongoing series drawn by multiple people. Oliver Copiel did the first volume and it just blew my mind. Then we have Stuart Eman, Gigi Cavagano, Daik Ruan, and finally Matt Buffagani, all of them bringing their absolute A game. So what's the series about, you ask me? Well, it's about a family of wizards who help protect the world from magical threats, and as the series progresses, you see that there are many factions to the Magic Order, and that our group we mainly follow is just one of many. And in the first volume, one of the members gets murdered, and it's a whodunit murder mystery with goddamn wizards who live in a castle that's hidden in a painting that's on display in the Chicago Institute for Art. Come on, that sentence had to have piqued your interest. But my favorite aspect of the series is the character of Cordelia, who is my second favorite Millarworld character for sure. She is a Jessica Jones-esque character who has severe drinking issues and keeps her family at arm's length, never allowing anyone to get too close to her. And when this murder happens, she has to confront her demons and become the person she was always scared to be because she never thought she was worthy of her place in her family or the Magic Order. Her character arc is wonderfully executed and extremely emotional. So if you're into fantasy and are looking for brand new concepts you probably haven't seen before mixed with some deep character studies, then this is the series for you. Edgelord Shit. Alright, now we come full circle. Miller has been known and criticized at times for his edgelordery. But hey, let's be for real, sometimes we just want some goddamn gory fun with some immature humor, and there's nothing wrong with that. Well, if me talking about his edgelord nature has made you interested to check out some of it, well, then I got 2 series for you to check out. Wanted. This is actually the series that started off Miller World, and it set up some very interesting concepts that get paid off almost 20 years later. More on that at the end of the video. But Wanted follows Wesley Gibson, a guy who grew up fatherless and now works a dead-end job with a boss that he hates, lives in a rundown apartment in a rundown neighborhood with a girlfriend who sleeps with his best friend, and on top of all of that, struggles with severe anxiety that he has to take medication for. He believes there's nothing else to life and his existence as a whole, until one day he finds out his father was one of the world's greatest assassins and was a part of a secret organization called the Fraternity. A group of supervillains that have killed all the world's superheroes and used a machine to wipe away the memories of superheroes from the world, and have now been controlling it from the shadows. His father has just passed and is now offered a position on the team and $5 million if he can get through the initiation process. This is a Breaking Bad-esque narrative with honestly high concept ideas. That blew me away the first time I read it. And oh yeah, it has some grotesque violence, needless sex, and horrid profanity. And let me tell you, I am not a fan of Edgelord Shit, but damn, I could not help but absolutely love this series from start to finish. And the best part of this story is the constant plot twist. You will never be able to guess where the narrative goes next. And the whole time you're reading, you sit there and wonder if you should be rooting for our protagonist, as he questions himself about his actions, and if he should go further down this path of villainy. Nemesis. Okay, this one is a bit odd because there's 3 volumes currently, and the first one seems to not be canon, or maybe parts of it are in the Miller World universe. It's kind of hard to explain without spoiling anything. But anyways, there are people out there that say the first volume is the worst comic ever made, which is such a hyperbolical garbage ass statement. Is the series super edgy? Yes, and that's the point. It's supposed to be offensive. That's actually the identity of this book. And if that's not for you, that's okay. I understand. But to pretend like there isn't an actual plot and interesting premise is beyond annoying to me. In fact, people have trashed this so hard that I was nervous to even read it, but when I got done with the first issue, all I wanted was more. So what is this shocking book about? The idea is, what if Batman was a sociopathic, almost Joker-like character? We meet a police chief who is now the target of a world-renowned assassin called Nemesis, who travels the globe murdering highly respected officers. And his backstory is a complete mystery, and even when there are revelations to be had, you can't exactly believe them. But as he hunts down this police chief, he does some truly devious acts, like attempting to steal a heart for a transplant that's going to a little girl. He murders a bunch of people by shoving batons through their chest. He puts a makeshift bomb in a teenage girl's ovaries, and also he does this. Yeah, he took down Air Force One by himself. I can't even lie, this is extremely badass. But when we get to volume 2, titled Nemesis Reloaded, it's pretty much a full reboot with the opening text saying, "Everything you heard before was a lie." So a portion of the first volume could have still theoretically happened on some level. And in Reloaded, we get a confirmed backstory that still somehow keeps a great deal about the character a mystery. And it's still similar to the first volume, having him go after a police chief, but this time, he takes over all of LA. And the story feels way larger, especially when you get to the huge plot twist at the very end of the book that I'll slightly cover without giving it away completely at the end of the video. But yeah, this series is just absolute carnage and fun while also being able to tell a thrilling ride that keeps you gripped until the very end. So if you want a bloody good time, go ahead and give this one a chance. And I honestly suggest going straight to Reloaded, because I think the narrative is paced better and has an overall grander feel. And if you happen to like it, go ahead and give the original one a chance. My overall pick. Not only is this one going to be my overall pick, as I believe it covers every category we have mentioned, but it also happens to be my favorite Miller World series with my favorite Miller World character. This book is one damn good time that's a longer series with multiple volumes, has hell of a lot of edgelord shit while also being extremely wholesome and human. So, my overall pick to read in the Miller World universe is Kick-Ass. You've definitely heard of this one before. Well, because it was a hit movie back in 2010, and a movie I absolutely love and have seen many times. And this year I finally decided to read the comics for the first time, and wow, this shit fucks, man. Kick-Ass follows the adventures of the world's first superhero, more on that in a second. A teenager by the name of Dave Lewinsky, who is obsessed with comics and asked himself why no one in the real world has put on a suit and defended the public like his favorite characters do. Well, that's because it would suck major ass. Especially when you get your ass beat every night because you have no martial arts skills and gadgets and any armor to protect yourself from harm. But Dave decides to do it anyway, and along the way he meets Hit Girl and Big Daddy, two vigilantes that are in the middle of taking down a big crime family, when Kick-Ass kinda stumbles in their way. And throughout the 4 original volumes, perfectly titled The Dave Lewinsky Years, you see the brother and sister relationship of Dave and Mindy, also known as the foul-mouthed Hit Girl, and how they learn how to grow up with each other in such an odd circumstance. You get a wonderful cast of colorful characters that all feel different and have their own quirks they bring to the table, with some gorgeous action scenes, brutal emotional moments, impactful character arcs, and playful and witty commentary on not only comics, but society. And another big win for me for loving this series so much is the fact that it is drawn by my favorite comic book artist of all time, John Romita Jr., who makes some of the most stunning work of his career in this book. I mean, within these 4 volumes is some of the best drawings I've ever seen in comics, and that alone makes Kick-Ass worth reading. Also, slight tangent, but if you do happen to read this, make sure to read Hit Girl before reading Kick-Ass 2, because you will be confused on a few things if you end up missing that one. But what's truly amazing about this series is that by the time you get to the end, it connects to a lot of the work we've already spoken about and assures the audience that the majority of Millarworld takes place in the same universe. Which makes me love Dave's arc even more, because if you remember me mentioning that in Wanted, they wiped away all memories of superheroes in the past, well, by Dave putting on his wetsuit and trying to make a difference, he ended up birthing a whole new era of superheroes, which gets a lot of expansion in Miller's giant crossover, Big Game. Yes, you heard me right, a giant crossover featuring almost every Millarworld title, making the universe all come together. And if you read Nemesis Reloaded, the big twist at the end ties to another big book we've covered here today, setting up the events of Big Game. What book does it connect to? Well, you'll have to find out for yourself. But to get back on track, what I love the most about the Kick-Ass series is it shows no matter how dark life gets, we always have something that can heal us, guide us, comfort us, and most importantly, inspire us when we need it most. And for Dave and Mindy, that's comics. These heroes that give us life lessons, give us emotional strength, and give us hope. Yes, does this series have absurd crude humor? Yes. Does it have disturbing edgelord shit? Yes. Does it get graphically violent? But throughout all that intense artistic voice that Miller portrays, you get moments like this, where Mindy and Dave hug each other, thinking it might be their last time seeing each other alive. This is one of the few comics to have ever made me genuinely cry. I think everything about this series is made so passionately that it's so hard to not love it. So this is why it is my overall pick. In conclusion, to wrap everything up, Millarworld is an exciting breath of fresh air for comic book lovers as well as people that don't read comics. And as much as I love DC and Marvel, it's nice that there's another superhero universe filled with a vast variety of characters we can attach to and love. So do yourself a big fat favor and check out at least one of these titles. And I hope it ends up giving you as much joy as it has for me.